What I think this discussion has actually shown is that the issues of poverty, the issues of ethnicity, the issue of mountain area development, the issue of bringing higher value to the economic activities of poor people, that last half of the glass is going to be very difficult to fill. And that therefore we need to be very clear and very strategic in how we're going to go about that. And from that perspective, of course, this discussion then helps us to think very clearly through what it is IFAD can do to support the government of Vietnam and, of course, the people of Vietnam to achieve the poverty reduction objectives that you have set yourself, which are very ambitious, but probably feasible at the rate economic development growth is going, provided that the right choices are actually being made. Since I'm making concluding remarks, I would like to group my remarks in 4 clusters. One related to some of the issues we discussed on poverty. A second cluster may be some of the concluding thoughts on the strategic objectives. That's number 2. Then number 3 is about the discussion we had on the institutional model that we are mobilizing to implement a strategy of this kind. And then finally, something about the investment approach we follow linked to the business model to deliver the strategy. So let me start with just a few comments. I don't want to tax you so late in the day with a long closing speech, but I just want to highlight a couple of points which I found interesting in our discussion on poverty and targeting. We heard a discussion about poverty not being concentrated in the mountain areas alone, that there is poverty in other areas as well. But because we have to make some strategic choices, it is probably a wise thing to do to look at areas with highest concentration of large groups of poor people that share common characteristics and are part of one system, no matter how unfavorable that may be. And from that perspective, I heard a few ideas about not necessarily excluding other areas, but certainly focusing on the mountain areas. That I heard, I think, loud and clear. But what I found interesting was the remarks this morning that were made by a few of you who said that ultimately we don't have models for the mountain areas, and don't make the mistake of bringing the lowland models to the uplands. Don't make that mistake. You have to develop models that are appropriate for the specific poverty profile of people in the mountain areas. And that is one point which I wanted to highlight. The second point which I wanted to highlight was that ultimately the development of the mountain areas, the reduction of poverty, is to some extent affected by what you were showing in your slide this morning, the land fragmentation. And I was so pleased that in your own remarks on the partnerships, Dr. Sun, that you came back on that issue of maybe assessing those areas where we have had some success on land consolidation and studying that a little carefully. It's not impossible to do it. It's difficult to do it, and we need to understand the elements of success. So I'm very pleased that we will be able to address that issue, because obviously some degree of land consolidation will help us improve agricultural productivity and output in the mountain areas, and that is then the basis for the livelihood diversification, which is an integral part of making a few farmers more productive, but creating economic value outside the farm energy system that also creates employment opportunities. And the professor was highlighting this afternoon that we have to do that in a very careful way, because what is happening is by having farmers do every single activity, you get diffused. They get diffused. They be confused. And I think this is about how we design the process for expansion of economic activities. And it becomes extremely important when we then talk about the women farmers, who then also have their third job, which is taking care of the family. And then it becomes another issue.